Good morning everybody and welcome to a rather cold feeling school this morning. It's very chilly. It's a freezing point outside and the building obviously is mainly empty and the heating's just come on, so we're all very cold and shivery inside school first thing. But hopefully our special new story time will cheer you up. And our new story time this week is Esio, Trot. And we're going to be reading this for each of the 5 days up to the February half-term holidays. So even though I'm shivering away, I'm sure the story will warm my heart. Here we go, I hope you enjoy it. Mr. Hoppy lived in a small flat high up in a tall concrete building. He lived alone. He'd always been a lonely man, and now that he was retired from work, he was lonelier than ever. There were two loves in Mr. Hoppy's life. One was the flowers that he grew on his balcony. They grew in pots and tubs and baskets like these ones here. And in the summer, the little balcony became a riot of colour. Mr. Hoppy's second love was a secret that he kept entirely to himself. You see, the balcony that was immediately below Mr. Hoppy's jutted out a good bit further from the building than his own. So Mr. Hoppy always had a fine view of what was going on below. The balcony belonged to an attractive middle-aged lady called Mrs. Silver. Now Mrs. Silver was a widow who also lived alone. And although she didn't know it, she was the object of Mr. Hoppy's second secret love. He had loved her from his balcony for many years, but he was a very shy man and he'd never been able to bring himself to give even the smallest hint of love from across the balcony. Every morning, Mr. Hoppy and Mrs. Silver exchanged polite conversation, looking down from one another on the balcony. It was as far as it went. The distance between their balconies might not have been more than a few yards, but to Mr. Hoppy it seemed like a million miles. He longed to invite Mrs. Silver up for a cup of tea and a biscuit, but every time he was about to form the words on his lips, the courage failed him. He was a very shy man. Oh, if only, he kept telling himself, if only he could do something tremendous like saving her life perhaps, or rescuing her from a gang of armed thugs. If only he could perform some great feat that would make him a hero in her eyes. Oh, if only. The trouble with Mrs. Silver was that she gave all her love to someone else. And that somebody was a tortoise called Alfie. Every day when Mr. Hoppy looked over his balcony and saw Mrs. Silver whispering endearments to Alfie and stroking his shell, he felt jealous. He wouldn't even have minded becoming a tortoise himself if it meant Mrs. Silver could stroke his shell every morning and whisper endearments to him in his ear. Alfie had lived with Mrs. Silver for years, and he lived on her balcony both summer and winter. Planks had been placed around the sides of the balcony so that Alfie could walk about without toppling over the edge. And in one corner there was a little house into which Alfie would crawl every night to keep warm. When the colder weather came along in November, Mrs. Silver would fill Alfie's house with dry hay, and the tortoise would crawl in there and bury himself deep under the hay and go to sleep for months on end without food or water. He was hibernating. And then in early spring, when Alfie felt the warmer weather through his shell, he would wake up and he'd crawl out very slowly out of his house and onto the balcony. And Mrs. Silver would clap her hands with joy and cry out, "Oh, welcome back, my darling one. How I so missed you, Alfie." It was at times like these that Mr. Hoppy wished more than ever that he could change places with Alfie and become a tortoise himself. Now we come to a certain bright morning in May, when something happened that changed and indeed electrified Mr. Hoppy's entire life. He was leaning over his balcony rail, watching Mrs. Silver serving Alfie his breakfast. "Here's the heart of the lettuce for you, my lovely tortoise," she was saying. "And here's a slice of fresh tomato and a piece of crispy celery." Good morning, Mrs. Silver," Mr. Hoppy said. "Alfie's looking well this morning," he cried from up above. "Isn't she gorgeous, Mr. Hoppy?" Mrs. Silver said, looking up and beaming into the eyes of Mr. Hoppy. "Oh, he's absolutely gorgeous. Look at him," Mr. Hoppy said, not meaning it really, of course. He was still jealous of the tortoise. And now, as he looked down at Mrs. Silver's smiling face, gazing back at his own, he thought for the 1000th time how pretty Mrs. Silver was, how sweet, how gentle, how full of kindness, and his heart, it ached with love for her. "Oh, I do wish he would grow a little faster, though," Mrs. Silver was saying. "You see, every spring, when he wakes up from his winter sleep, I weigh him on the kitchen scales, and you know that in 11 years, he's not gained more than 3 ounces. That's almost nothing, Mr. Hoppy." What does he weigh now, then?" Mr. Hoppy asked her. Just 13 ounces. 13, that's all. About as much as a grapefruit." "Yes, well, tortoises are very slow growers," Mr. Hoppy said solemnly. "But you see, they can live for 100 years. Oh, I know that. But I do so wish he would grow just a little bit bigger. He's such a tiny, wee little fellow." "He seems just fine as he is," Mr. Hoppy said. "No, he's not just fine, Mr. Hoppy. Try to think how miserable it must make him feel to be teaching. Everyone wants to grow up, you know, Mr. Hoppy." "You really would love him to grow a bit bigger, wouldn't you?" coughed Mr. Hoppy. And even as he said it, in his mind, something suddenly went click. "Oh, she'd love him to be bigger," thought Mr. Hoppy. And an amazing idea came rushing swiftly into the old man's head. Maybe this could be the chance that he'd been waiting for. I wonder what the chance is. I wonder what the idea is, guys. What is Mr. Hoppy thinking? What plan does he have to win the heart of Mrs. Silver? Well, if you stay tuned tomorrow, we'll find out in the next part of Esio Trot. I'm going to go and get warm somewhere, if I can find somewhere anyway, that is. Take care, stay safe, and come back tomorrow to find out Mr. Hoppy's plan to win Mrs. Silver's heart. Take care, bye-bye.